Home prices in your city may be falling right now, but the cost of owning that home is quietly exploding. Mortgage payments are higher than ever, insurance bills are rising, taxes are climbing, and yet your home is worth less than it was a year ago. This is the most dangerous phase of a housing downturn. Not when prices peak, but when they fall, and trap people who believed waiting would make them safe. Across major American cities, buyers have vanished, investors have pulled out, and sellers are discovering that lowering the price is no longer enough. So here's the question you need to answer today. Which cities are making people poorer, even as homes become cheaper? For more than a decade, American housing followed a familiar script. Low interest rates pushed prices higher. Migration followed jobs. Investors chased yield. Builders responded with confidence. Every slowdown felt temporary. That script is now broken. The first fracture came from interest rates. Mortgage rates didn't rise gradually, they snapped upward. Monthly payments surged even as prices began to soften, locking millions of buyers out of the market. Affordability collapsed faster than prices could adjust. Then came the second break. Migration reversed. Cities that absorbed waves of remote workers during the pandemic are now watching those same households leave. Return to office mandates, layoffs, and shrinking stock-based compensation stripped away the demand that once justified record prices. The people who could afford these homes disappeared almost overnight. Investors noticed first. Institutional buyers and small-scale landlords alike began pulling back. In many markets, investor purchases dropped 40–50%. When experienced capital exits simultaneously, it is rarely a coincidence. It is a warning. At the same time, supply kept growing. Projects approved during the boom years continued to deliver new units into a market that no longer needed them. Overbuilding didn't cause the downturn, but it is now amplifying it. Listings are stacking up. Days on market are stretching. Price cuts are becoming routine. This cycle is different from past corrections for one critical reason. The growth engines are gone. Prices are falling, but jobs are not expanding. Homes are cheaper, but ownership costs remain punishing. Demand is weak, but supply is still arriving. That imbalance is reshaping power dynamics across the country. Buyers are cautious, sellers are trapped, and entire cities are discovering that the recent prosperity was thinner than it appeared. If you want to understand how this plays out on the ground, city by city, household by household, this is where the real story begins. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the next 7 cases reveal how quickly confidence can collapse once the numbers stop working. 1. Seattle. For years, Seattle was treated as untouchable. An economic fortress powered by technology giants, high salaries, and stock-based wealth that seemed immune to gravity. Home prices surged not because people needed shelter, but because equity felt endless. That illusion has now collapsed. As the tech sector began shedding jobs, Seattle lost the very buyers who once defined its housing market. Tens of thousands of high-income workers disappeared from payrolls, and with them went down payments fueled by stock grants that no longer held their value. The result was immediate. According to Redfin data, median home prices in King County have fallen nearly 10% from their peak, erasing hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity for recent buyers in less than 2 years. Inventory tells an even darker story. Active listings have surged more than 40% year over year in several Seattle neighborhoods. Homes that once sparked bidding wars now sit quietly, accumulating days on market. Luxury properties are being hit hardest, with high-end home sales down over 30% as confidence evaporates at the top of the market. Investors have already made their decision. Investor purchases in Seattle have plunged by roughly 50%. When capital exits this decisively, it signals more than caution. It signals disbelief in near-term recovery. Ownership costs are worsening the pressure. Mortgage rates remain elevated. Property taxes continue to rise. Insurance premiums have increased alongside replacement costs. Even renters are stepping back as rents soften, widening the gap between the cost of buying and renting to levels that actively discourage new buyers. Foreclosure activity is beginning to creep upward as adjustable-rate mortgages reset and payments spike. This is not a wave yet, but it is the first crack. Seattle climbed the highest during the boom, and now it has the longest distance to fall. So the question becomes unavoidable. If even Seattle is breaking under pressure, which cities were never truly strong to begin with? 2. Portland. Not long ago, Portland was held up as a model of modern urban success. Creative industries, cultural identity, walkable neighborhoods, and a steady influx of high-income residents pushed home values higher year after year. For a time, it seemed Portland had cracked the code, growth without limits. That confidence has now fractured. Unlike cities hit primarily by interest rates, Portland is facing something deeper: a crisis of belief. Rising taxes, persistent public safety concerns, and visible deterioration in the urban core have driven many high-earning households to leave. The people who once absorbed rising prices are no longer here or are actively planning their exit. The housing data reflects this retreat. Regional multiple listing service figures show Portland's median sale price is down more than 5% year over year. At the same time, active residential listings have surged nearly 30%, flooding the market with homes that buyers are increasingly unwilling to touch at current valuations. Days on market now exceed 50 days, a stark reversal from the rapid turnover of the boom years. The damage extends beyond residential housing. Downtown commercial vacancy rates have reached record highs, dragging down condo values and mixed-use developments tied to urban foot traffic. This erosion is compounded by outbound migration. Multnomah County has lost over $1 billion in adjusted gross income as higher earners relocate elsewhere. That loss weakens the tax base and further undermines demand. Distress is no longer theoretical. Foreclosure filings are up roughly 15%, and total home sales have fallen more than 20%. To move inventory at all, over 40% of sellers are now offering price cuts or concessions, quiet admissions that the market they remember no longer exists. Portland is not merely cooling, it is recalibrating under the weight of declining confidence, shrinking demand, and a reputation problem that price alone cannot fix. And that raises the next question. What happens to the cities just outside Portland, those that relied on its strength to survive? 3. Tacoma. Tacoma was never meant to lead the Pacific Northwest housing boom. Its role was simpler and more fragile. For decades, Tacoma functioned as a pressure valve for Seattle, a working-class port city where buyers could still afford a home while commuting north for higher wages. That balance has broken. When Seattle's prices exploded, buyers flooded into Tacoma, pushing values far beyond what local incomes could reasonably support. The city absorbed demand it was never designed to hold. Now, as Seattle cools, Tacoma is being crushed from both directions, losing buyers from above while its own residents are priced out below. The numbers reveal how quickly the damage is spreading. Data from the Northwest Multiple Listing Service shows active inventory in Tacoma has surged nearly 95% compared to last year. This is not a seasonal fluctuation. It is a structural shock. At the same time, closed sales have fallen more than 20%, signaling a market where supply is overwhelming demand. Prices are already responding. The median sale price has declined by roughly 5%, erasing gains for buyers who entered near the peak. But the deeper problem lies in affordability. The average mortgage payment now consumes more than 45% of the area's median household income, effectively locking out the city's core workforce. Stress is beginning to surface across the system. Foreclosure starts in Pierce County are up approximately 14%, and transaction cancellations have jumped to 16% as financing falls apart late in the process. Even the rental market is weakening, with vacancy rates climbing toward 6%, removing the fallback option for overstretched owners. Tacoma's housing market was built on spillover demand. When that demand vanished, the city was left holding prices it could never sustain on its own. So the question shifts again. If a city collapses once outside money leaves, was its growth ever real to begin with? 4. Bend. Bend was never marketed as a job center. It was sold as a lifestyle. Mountain views, breweries, outdoor access, and the promise that work could happen anywhere turned this high desert town into one of the most aggressive pandemic boom markets in the country. Equity-rich buyers from California and Seattle arrived quickly, often purchasing homes sight unseen, convinced that remote work had permanently rewritten the rules. That assumption is now unraveling. Bend's housing surge rested on two fragile pillars: cheap money and permanent remote work. Both have collapsed. According to data from Realtor.com, Bend's median listing price has already fallen roughly 6% from its peak. Inventory has surged more than 40% year over year, flooding a market that no longer has the demand to absorb it. Homes are no longer moving. The median days on market has stretched to approximately 55 days, an eternity compared to the frenzied pace of just 2 years ago. Absorption rates have fallen sharply, and open houses that once sparked bidding wars now sit empty despite price cuts. The pressure is most visible among investors. Vacancy rates for second homes and short-term rentals have climbed toward 8% as tourism revenue fails to cover rising mortgage, insurance, and maintenance costs. As cash flow disappears, forced selling follows. Nearly 42% of active listings in Bend now carry price reductions, a clear signal of distress rather than negotiation. Builders are retreating as well. Permits for new single-family homes have fallen by roughly 25%, reflecting a sudden realization that demand was borrowed from the future and has now been used up. Bend was the textbook Zoom town, and like most textbook examples, it is now serving as a warning. Which raises the next question. If lifestyle markets collapse this quickly once conditions change, what happens to cities that relied on migration rather than money? 5. Spokane. For a brief moment, Spokane looked like a solution. Lower prices, urban amenities, and distance from the congestion and politics of Western Washington turned the city into a pandemic-era refuge. Remote workers arrived with higher incomes, confident they had found a version of city life without coastal costs. That window is closed. Spokane's boom was driven less by local economic strength than by inbound migration. When that flow slowed, the market was left exposed. Redfin data shows the number of homes listed for sale has jumped more than 35% compared to last year, creating a growing inventory overhang that buyers are increasingly unwilling to absorb. Prices have stopped climbing. In real terms, the median sale price is now down nearly 3% after adjusting for inflation. Homes that once sold in days now linger for roughly 45 days on the market, signaling a sharp reversal in buyer urgency. Nearly 40% of active listings have undergone price cuts, evidence that sellers are still anchored to expectations shaped by a market that no longer exists. Builders have responded defensively. Permits for new single-family homes have declined by approximately 20% as developers pull back to avoid saturating an already weakening market. This retreat reflects a broader realization. The demand that fueled Spokane's rise was temporary. Migration data reinforces this shift. Inbound movement has slowed to a trickle, removing the external pressure that once supported higher prices. Without a strong base of local wage growth to replace it, Spokane's housing market has lost its primary engine. The sale-to-list price ratio has now slipped below 100%, officially marking the end of over-asking offers. What remains is a market searching for equilibrium, but without the demand needed to find it quickly. Spokane did not collapse because it overheated. It collapsed because the people who came stopped coming. So the next question is inevitable. What happens when even state capitals begin to fail once remote work disappears? 6. Olympia. Olympia was supposed to be different. As Washington's state capital, it carried the reputation of stability, government jobs, steady incomes, and insulation from the volatility seen in private sector economies. During the pandemic, that image became even more attractive to remote workers fleeing Seattle's costs and congestion. That support has faded. Olympia's surge was built on a temporary premium, the belief that remote work was permanent. As companies reversed course and layoffs spread across the tech sector, the artificial demand that once propped up the market began to disappear. Homes purchased at peak prices are now colliding with a buyer pool that has sharply contracted. The data reflects this reversal with unusual clarity. According to Zillow figures, roughly 55% of homes in Olympia are now selling below their original asking price. This is no longer a negotiation-driven market. It is a concession-driven one. Pending sales have fallen approximately 18% year over year, signaling hesitation from buyers who no longer feel urgency. Supply conditions are shifting just as quickly. Months of inventory have climbed beyond 3 months, pushing Olympia firmly into buyer market territory. New listings are up around 12%, adding pressure to a market already struggling to clear existing supply. As a result, the average sale-to-list price ratio has slipped to about 98%, erasing the premiums that once defined the area. Beneath the surface, financial stress is building. Mortgage delinquencies in Thurston County have increased by roughly 9%, often an early indicator of future distress sales. At the same time, the average time required for a home to go under contract has nearly doubled, stretching from weeks to nearly a full month. Olympia's housing market was not undone by speculation. It was undone by dependence on a work model that no longer exists. Which leads to the final question in this sequence. If even government-anchored cities are cracking, where was safety ever real? 7. Salem. Salem was never supposed to be on this list. As Oregon's capital, it carried the image of predictability, government employment, modest growth, and insulation from the wild price swings seen in Portland or Seattle. For years, Salem was viewed as a quiet fallback, affordable, stable, and safe. That assumption is now being tested. During the pandemic surge, Salem absorbed buyers priced out of Portland. Prices rose rapidly, but local wages did not follow. What looked like organic growth was in reality borrowed demand spilling over from a much hotter market. Once interest rates rose and migration slowed, that imbalance became impossible to ignore. The data confirms the shift. More than 34% of active listings in Salem have undergone price reductions, meaning 1 out of every 3 sellers has already been forced to reset expectations. Inventory has climbed roughly 22% year over year, while homes are sitting longer. Days on market are up more than 15% as buyers hesitate under higher borrowing costs. The investor retreat is even more telling. According to CoreLogic data, investor purchases in the area have fallen by over 45%. When speculative capital exits a market this quickly, it signals that future appreciation is no longer expected. What remains are owner-occupants facing shrinking equity and rising monthly expenses. Prices have begun to respond. After exploding during the pandemic frenzy, Salem's median sale price has hit a ceiling and is now down close to 3% year over year when adjusted. Foreclosure filings have risen approximately 12% quarter over quarter, still early but moving in the wrong direction. Salem's decline is subtle, not spectacular, but that is precisely what makes it dangerous. Because if even a government-anchored, low-volatility city begins to slide once outside demand disappears, it suggests that stability itself was conditional. And that leaves one final question hanging over the entire region. If no city is truly protected, what does safe even mean in this housing cycle? When cheaper homes still cost more. Taken individually, none of these 7 cities tells the full story. Seattle's tech collapse, Portland's crisis of confidence, Tacoma's dependency on outside money, Bend's Zoomtown illusion, Spokane's migration reversal, Olympia's remote work hangover, Salem's quiet erosion of stability. But together they reveal a pattern that is impossible to ignore. This downturn is not being driven by panic. It is being driven by math. Prices are falling, but affordability is not improving. Demand is weak, yet supply keeps arriving. Ownership costs remain high while job security deteriorates, and the belief that waiting makes you safe has trapped thousands of households in properties that no longer work financially. The greatest damage of this cycle is not measured in percentages, it is measured in lost flexibility. Homeowners who bought near the peak cannot sell without losses. Buyers who waited are discovering that cheaper prices still come with higher monthly costs. Investors who relied on perpetual appreciation have already exited, leaving behind markets searching for new foundations that may not exist. The common thread across every city is not geography. It is belief. The belief that prices only move one direction. The belief that migration never reverses. The belief that growth, once achieved, becomes permanent. History shows otherwise. Every housing cycle ends the same way. Not with a crash, but with a long, grinding realization that expectations were built on conditions that no longer apply. This moment may be an adjustment, or it may be the early phase of something deeper and longer. The question is no longer whether prices will fall further. The question is how many people will remain trapped while they do. If this analysis helped you see the housing market more clearly, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. And if you're living through this shift yourself, share your experience in the comments, because the real story of this cycle is still being written.